Hi everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Joanna, and today we're unpacking a topic that still shows up in debates, YouTube comments, and honestly, random class discussions. Should India be grateful to Britain for the trains? You've probably heard this before, the idea that colonialism wasn't great, but at least the British gave India the railways. But here's the thing, when we dig deeper historically and economically, that claims falls apart really fast. So in the next section, we're going to look at what the railways were really for, who paid for them, and the human cost behind them. So let's start from the beginning. Britain didn't arrive in India as some kind of savior or developer. They came through the East India Company, basically a private company funded by British investors. So over time, it became a government-like force with its own army, its own laws, and the power to tax Indians. So, according to historians from Britannica and the History Association, or UK, the company slowly took political control over a huge part of the subcontinent, and after the 1857 rebellion, the British crown Queen Victoria took over officially. Now here's the key part. The British didn't build railways out of kindness. They built them because it made ruling India easier and more profitable. Historians repeatedly point out that these railways helped Britain move goods, troops, resources, and money, not Indians. And remember the gift narrative? Here's the truth. Indians paid for the railways, and British investors profited. British companies were given guaranteed 5% return on their investment paid out of Indian taxes. So that means whether or not the railways made money, British shareholders kept earning. And get this, India wasn't even allowed to build its own trains, even though Indian engineers were fully capable. Britain forced India to buy locomotives from British factories, over 14,000 engines from 1854 to 1947. So imagine this. Someone breaks into your house, builds a ramp to make stealing easier, charges you for the ramp, and then says you should be grateful. Well, that's basically what happened. And here's where things get even clearer. First, resource extraction. Railways made it incredibly easy to move cotton, jute, tea, spices, timber, coal, all to the ports, all straight to Britain. Second, military control. Trains allowed British troops to be deployed fast to stop rebellions or control population. Third, market manipulation. The trains helped bring in British manufactured goods and wipe out Indian industries, for example, Indian textiles. And then fourth, environmental and labor exploitation. Massive deforestation was done to lay tracks. Indian laborers did dangerous work for very low pay, while higher positions were reserved for Europeans. So no, the railways weren't meant to unite India or help everyday people. They were colonial tools first and infrastructure second. One of the darkest consequences of colonial economic policies, which railways made easier, was famine. The most famous example is the Bengal famine of 1943. Between 2 until 4 million people died. Food was diverted to British soldiers during World War II. Churchill later said that famine was Indians' own fault for breeding like rabbits. Trains meant grain could be moved, but not to starving Indians. Instead, it was moved away from them. Historians describe these famines as policy-driven, not natural disasters. The railways helped enforce those policies fast and efficiently. Earlier famines like the 1770 Bengal famine had similar roots. Extraction first, policies of the East India Company. By 1947, Britain was done with India, not because they felt guilty, but because ruling it was no longer profitable and the independence movement was unstoppable. But the way they left was careless. The British lawyer Cyril Ratcliffe, if I'm not mistaken, was given 40 days to draw borders for millions of people who practice different religions, language, and culture. The result? one of the largest migration in human history, around 15 million people displaced and between 1 until 2 million killed. And this is the haunting part from the clip. Trains, the same trains that British built, became sites of mass murder. Entire carriages of refugees were slaughtered and then sent across the border as ghost trains. British officials knew, but they were already focused on living, not helping. So, why does the myth survive that railways were a gift? It is partly because infrastructure looks impressive, partly because the British Empire has long used propaganda to make itself seem benevolent, and partly because many people simply haven't been taught what the railways were for. So historians and economists today, from Shashi Tharoor to Oxford economic historians, agree on one thing. The railways helped India only after independence, when Indians repurposed them for their own needs. Under colonial rule, they were built to drain wealth, not to develop the region. So, should India thank Britain for the trains? Not really. The trains weren't a gift. They were part of a massive economic machine that extracted wealth, controlled population, and then contributed to suffering. What people benefit from today is the post-colonial railway system, rebuilt, expanded, and finally run for the people who actually live there. Well, I think understanding this helped us challenge romanticized version of colonial history and give us a more honest view of the past. So, for the listener, thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this podcast, stick around for the next deep dive. See you. Bye-bye.